He was 32 years old, and he had already run out of world to conquer. Every army that stood in front of Alexander the Great had fallen. Every empire that dared to resist him had crumbled. He had done what no one before him had ever done, and what no one after him would ever fully repeat. And it still wasn't enough. Because the thing that made Alexander unstoppable on every battlefield he ever stood on, was the exact same thing that was quietly destroying him the entire time. One night, in Babylon, the greatest conqueror the world had ever seen went to bed with a fever. He never got back up. No one agrees on how he died. What they do agree on, is why he could never stop long enough to live. To understand a man like that, you have to go back to the boy he used to be. When Alexander was 13, his father did something no king had ever done before. He handed his son over to the single greatest mind in the Greek world, and said, "Teach him everything." That mind belonged to Aristotle. And for years, in near total isolation, he poured something into Alexander far more dangerous than knowledge. He gave him heroes. Achilles. Homer. The idea that an ordinary life was the one unforgivable failure.
I have no more worlds to conquer.
People repeat that line like it's inspiring. It isn't. It's the sound of a boy who was taught, before he'd even become a man, that legends are the only lives worth living. His father, Philip II, had already carved Macedonia into a real power. And Alexander grew up in the shadow of every one of his victories.
My father will leave nothing great for me to do.
That wasn't a child complaining. That was the first sign of a hunger that would never once go quiet, for the rest of his life. Then Philip was murdered. And the throne fell to a 20-year-old who had spent his entire childhood being told he had something enormous to prove. He didn't hesitate. Within 2 years, he was already marching into Persia, and he would not stop moving again for over a decade. On the way, in a city called Gordium, he came across an old legend. A knot, tied so impossibly tight that no one had ever found its ends. Whoever untied it, the story said, was destined to rule all of Asia. Kings before him had stared at that knot for years.
It doesn't say how it has to come undone.
And he cut it apart with his sword. It's remembered as a clever trick. It was really a warning. Alexander was never going to solve the world patiently. He was going to cut straight through it, and worry about the consequences later. His first real trial against the Persian king, Darius, came at a narrow pass called Issus. Darius had the numbers, the position, everything. He had Alexander's smaller army boxed in with nowhere to run. And Alexander turned the trap into a killing ground, crushing Persia's advantage by forcing the battle into a space too narrow for it to matter. Darius broke first. He fled so fast he left his own mother, wife, and children behind in the abandoned camp. Alexander could have done anything he wanted with a captured royal family. Instead, he let them live in comfort, and let the world watch him do it. It wasn't kindness. It was a message, sent to every kingdom still deciding whether to fight him or kneel, resist, and I will destroy you. Kneel, and I will be generous. Either way, I am already your future. Persia was the largest empire the world had ever known. And piece by piece, Alexander was taking it apart. The clearest proof came at Gaugamela. Darius chose the ground himself this time. Flattened it for his chariots. Brought a force that outnumbered Alexander many times over. By every rule of war, Alexander should have lost that day. Instead, he saw what no one else did. Darius's line was stretched so wide to avoid being outflanked that it had torn itself open, right at the center, right where the king himself was standing. Alexander drove his cavalry straight through that gap. Straight at Darius. And once again, the king ran. And once again, an empire fell apart the moment its ruler did. That wasn't fortune. That was a mind that read a battlefield like a puzzle built specifically to be solved by him, and no one else. He fought at the front of every one of these battles, personally, when every king before him had learned to stay safely behind the lines that it sounds like,
"Send the healers away, I fight, or I don't lead."
His entire identity depended on being untouchable. If he ever stopped being the most impressive man in the room, he had no idea who he was. And that need never, once, turned itself off. He took Egypt, and its priests called him a living god. He took Babylon, and sat on the throne of the empire he'd just destroyed. He pushed on into Afghanistan, then Pakistan, then India, through terrain that broke armies with exhaustion alone. But somewhere in that endless march, the cracks started showing. He began dressing like a Persian king. Adopting Persian customs. Trying to rule his new empire the way its people expected a ruler to look. His own men, the same Macedonians who had followed him since Greece, watched their king start to look like the very enemy they'd bled to defeat. The breaking point came at a drunken dinner in Afghanistan. An old friend, Clitus, a man who had once saved Alexander's own life in battle, mocked him in front of the entire room, accusing him of forgetting where he actually came from. Alexander grabbed a spear from a nearby guard, and killed him where he stood. He sobered up within the hour. He wept for days afterward. None of it brought Clitus back. This is the part the legend conveniently skips. The same fire that made him unbeatable on a battlefield had no off switch anywhere else in his life. And then, at a river called the Hyphasis, deep in India, his own army finally did something no enemy ever could.
We turn back, now, when everything ahead is still ours to take.
They stopped. They had been marching for 8 straight years. They were done. Alexander sulked in his tent for 3 days, certain they would come crawling back. They didn't. For the first time in his life, Alexander lost. So they turned around. And the retreat nearly finished what no army ever could. Disease. Starvation. A desert crossing that swallowed thousands of his own men. Alexander survived it. But something in him didn't come back the same that he started executing officers over plots that may not have even existed. He drank more, and more, and more. And in Babylon, after one final long night of it, a fever took hold, and never let go. 12 days later, he was dead. 32 years old. For over 2,000 years, no one has agreed on why. Malaria. Typhoid. Poison, slipped into his cup by someone finally tired of watching him kill anyone who questioned him. His body, they say, didn't decay for days, which ancient writers took as proof he was truly divine. It was more likely just a mystery medicine at the time had no name for. The most powerful man alive died, and even the physician standing over him couldn't agree on why. His empire, the largest the world had ever seen, didn't survive him by a single generation. His own generals tore it apart within weeks, warring over the pieces for the next 40 years. They even fought over his body, hijacking his own funeral procession just to claim the right to bury him. He spent his whole life terrified of being ordinary. The moment he stopped moving, everything he built on that fear came apart at once that he is remembered as the greatest conqueror who ever lived. But by his own words, at 32, holding more of the earth than any human before him, he wasn't satisfied. He was in tears, because there was nothing left to prove himself against. That isn't a flaw that belongs to one dead king. That's a wiring your own brain still runs today. The same hunger that could never let Alexander rest is the same one that keeps you chasing the next promotion, the next milestone, the next win, never quite letting yourself land on enough. He had an empire to prove it on. Most of us just have a job, a bank account, and a phone that never stops reminding us what everyone else has already achieved. He never found his finish line. It might be worth asking whether you're chasing one that doesn't exist either.